Today, President Trump was handed 2 more legal defeats, this time in Pennsylvania and Arizona, in his last-ditch effort to challenge the election in court. Well, now the president is shifting tactics as he attempts to cast doubt on the results. CBS's Paula Reed reports tonight from the White House.
With courtroom losses piling up, President Trump is trying a new approach in his fight to overturn the election: personal political pressure. He's called Republican legislators from Michigan to the White House tomorrow to persuade them to intervene after Wayne County Republicans failed to block Joe Biden's win earlier this week.
Joe Biden won the state of Michigan by over 150,000 votes.
Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer said the president needs to realize the election is over.
Stop spending energy to mislead about what happened in this election.
The Trump campaign had tried to block the Michigan election.
Is really available to most Americans.
But these numbers are absolutely mind-numbing. And if we don't want to be talking about 300,000, 350,000, 400,000, it takes individual action of wearing masks, keeping apart, and washing our hands. But it takes a lot more than that. Congress has to step up. They stepped up back in the spring, but if they step up again now and help get us through this winter to the time when we truly have enough vaccine to vaccinate Americans, we could see this turn around.
Vice President not taking any questions. Reporters asking, where is the president?
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President.
The president-elect growing increasingly concerned for the welfare of the American people. Biden today meeting virtually with a group of bipartisan governors.
My transition team hasn't been able to get access to information we need to be able to deal with everything from testing and guidance to the all-important issue of vaccine distributions and vaccination.
We asked him about the consequences.
How many lives do you think are at risk here if this transition remains stalled?
There's no excuse not to share the data and let us begin to plan. Because on day one, it's going to take us time. If we don't have access to all this data, it's going to put us behind the 8 ball by a matter of a month or more. And that's lives. How many would be lost as a consequence of that? I can't tell you.
Almost all of the president's legal challenges have been dismissed. Hitting dead ends, Trump and his campaign are now looking to friendly state lawmakers and election officials to try to overturn the results in key states. States Biden won by tens of thousands of votes.
What do you think the president is doing? What are Americans witnessing here?
Let me choose my words here. I think they're witnessing incredible irresponsibility, incredibly damaging messages being sent to the rest of the world about how democracy functions. And I think it is well, I don't know his motive, but I just think it's totally irresponsible.
And he had strong words for the president's actions, questioning if they're even legal.
He will go down in history as being one of the most irresponsible presidents in American history. It's just out of the, not even within the norm at all. There's questions whether it's even legal.
Mary Bruce asking the questions there late today. Let's get to Mary in Wilmington tonight. And I know there was news today about Michigan as well.
But the fact is that the people who are certifying the votes in the counties are going to do this audit and recount. And if the votes come out in favor of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump and there's no fraud proven in court, then any pressure on any kind of public official isn't really going to matter. But speaking of public officials and on Capitol Hill, it's interesting to look too. You had a number of conservative Republican congressmen today also calling for federal hearings on absentee ballots, massive mail-in voting. So even, John, if we get through these lawsuits and the Trump campaign is or is not victorious in a number of them, I don't think this issue of how Americans vote now, given a lot of these policies will probably stay, will be going away anytime soon, and there will be questions about how things were handled for quite some time.
Hey, John, real quick, because we just got a few seconds left in this segment. How long are you hearing that this will go on?
I think Trump's in for the long haul on this. I think he's in as far as he can go, as far as he can possibly stretch out, and they're raising a lot of money through small donations, so I don't think they're fiscally constrained.
All right. We will take a break, and we'll be back with the latest on the coronavirus surge. Stay with us here tonight on Special Report.
Tonight, President-elect Joe Biden blasting President Trump for challenging the election. As President Trump escalates his efforts to overturn his defeat, Biden calling him one of the most irresponsible presidents in American history. And the dueling messages on the pandemic. The White House task force holding its first briefing since July, but the president not taking part. And what Biden said about potential legal action of his own to force the president's hand. The new CDC warning Americans urged not to travel for Thanksgiving as COVID surges and hospitalizations hit a new record. Dr. Fauci speaking out on concerns the vaccine is being rushed. And a third promising candidate. What makes Oxford's vaccine different from Pfizer's and Moderna's? Plus, in some rollout, how will it work? Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's unprecedented visit in the West Bank. What makes his trip so controversial? The new dashcam video, a deputy opening fire at a car, 2 black teens inside, killed. The family saying authorities made a deadly mistake. Deep cleaning surfaces, does it stop the spread of COVID-19? What the science now says. And Hollywood at home, is it the future of movies?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening. President-elect Joe Biden tonight using some of his harshest language yet about President Trump and his flailing and baseless efforts to overturn the results of the election. Biden calling Donald Trump one of the most irresponsible presidents in history as critical sharing of information about the coronavirus pandemic is held up. The president still refusing to concede the election or allow the transition process to occur. The Biden team tonight weighing legal options. Kristen Welker has late details.
Tonight, President-elect Joe Biden blasting President Trump for refusing to concede and for what he says is the message he's sending to the American people.
I think they're witnessing incredible irresponsibility.
The president's decision not to assist the Biden transition, depriving Biden of critical briefings on national security and COVID. Tonight, Biden leaving open the possibility he may take legal action against the Trump administration, although leaning against it.
My judgment is that we'll get further along by actually working with our Republican colleagues now. It's an open question. It could change.
So you haven't ruled it out? You haven't ruled out legal action against the Trump administration, against the GSA?
We haven't ruled it out.
NBC News learning from 4 people familiar with the discussions. While Biden is growing impatient, his team is also worried if a court rules against them, the move could backfire. It comes with both Biden and the Trump administration hosting dueling press conferences on the pandemic, including the first White House task force briefing since July. Dr. Fauci touting progress on vaccines.
So we need to put to rest any concept that this was rushed in an inappropriate way. This is really solid.
Vice President Pence delivering this message from the president.
Our task force, this administration, and our president does not support another national lockdown. And we do not support closing schools.
Biden meeting today with a group of governors, with some already announcing new lockdown restrictions, including closing in-person schools.
No national shutdown, because every region, every area, every community can be different.
Meanwhile, the Trump legal team pressing ahead with challenges to the election. Rudy Giuliani today alleging an unproven conspiracy of voter fraud in big cities, despite secretaries of state saying there was no widespread fraud, and the Homeland Security Department declaring it the most secure election ever. Giuliani today declining to provide reporters any evidence to back up his allegations.
So the answer is no. The answer is I can't do it because I can't put a witness's life in jeopardy.
Meanwhile, this tonight from former President Obama to MSNBC.
These are just bald assertions. They've been repeatedly rejected by the courts.
President Trump has invited to the White House top Republican state lawmakers from Michigan as his campaign tries to overturn the results in that state where Biden leads by more than 150,000 votes. Lester.
Kristen Welker tonight, thank you. And from the CDC this evening, an urgent plea for Americans to stay home this Thanksgiving as COVID infections overwhelm the healthcare system and test our instincts and our resolve at this perilous moment.
President Trump is pulling out more stops in his bid to undo President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Wisconsin today formally ordered a recount in Milwaukee and one other heavily Democratic county, paid for by the Trump campaign. And it was widely reported that Mr. Trump will try to get state lawmakers in states he lost to name new electors. These are the individuals who represent their state in choosing the next president. We'll get details on this after the news summary. Hurricane Iota's death toll has risen to more than 40 across Central America as search teams find more bodies in landslides. The slides were triggered by flooding that overwhelmed whole communities in Honduras and Nicaragua. Rescue efforts are continuing, and the president of Honduras is pledging to help thousands left homeless.
We are continuing with humanitarian work. It is crucial that people do not return to their homes. There are still places at risk. In the meantime, we have to attend to our people with hot food in the shelters. Those who are outside of their homes, in shelters, support will be taken there.
All told, some 230,000 Hondurans and Nicaraguans are living in shelters. Human Rights Watch called today for the U.S.-led security coalition in Afghanistan to investigate soldiers' conduct. That is after an Australian probe concluded that Australian special forces killed at least 39 Afghan prisoners, farmers, and civilians over the years. The report says it's alleged that British and U.S. special forces carried out similar crimes. A badly damaged giant space telescope in Puerto Rico is shutting down. The National Science Foundation says that the iconic Arecibo radio telescope is unstable and beyond repair after years of hurricanes, humidity, and earthquakes. The telescope, with its 1,000-foot wide dish, was built in the 1960s. It has searched for planets, asteroids, and possible life forms. Back in this country, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin is ending several emergency lending programs run by the Federal Reserve during the pandemic. They used Treasury funds to back the corporate bond and municipal debt markets, among other things. The Fed says that the economy still needs that support. But Mnuchin said today that Congress intended the programs to stop at year's end. And on Wall Street, stocks managed a modest advance. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 44 points to close at 29,483. The Nasdaq rose 103 points, and the S&P 500 added 14.
Well, first of all, I think that Trump seems to have taken the lesson from business where a lawsuit can, cause your enemy or your opponent a little bit of harm and cost them money and credibility and draw things out. He doesn't seem to realize that, or he does realize maybe, but throwing, sand in the machinery of government is really causing a lot of harm right now to both the country and the Republican brand. What I think Trump is trying to do is he's trying to freeze the field, keep his supporters in place, and maintain the base for the 2022 midterms and beyond. But what he's doing is destructive, and he really needs to stop for the good of the country. You can't relive or replay the fourth quarter once it's over. You've got to move on and think about the next game or the next season or whatever. And I really urge, other Republicans, it's time to be a Mitt Romney Republican right now and focus on being gracious, being calm, and where the country needs to go. I think that's leadership. I think that's presidential leadership. And I call on Donald Trump to do that, to do it now, to do it yesterday.
Gloria, Mitt Romney, of course, has been on a pretty lonely island when it comes to behaving that way with as Dan says, with the great graciousness. Gloria, to Dan's point, does the president realize his actions could backfire on him, or really does he have some sort of a plan here where he thinks 70 million people are going to stay with him? He's going to be running some sort of, I don't know, like government in exile.
I don't know. He doesn't seem to have a plan, and when I talk to my sources and ask them, have you told him that this is hurting democracy? Have you told them that this isn't good for the Republican Party? Have you told them that this is actually anti-democratic? And the answer is, it doesn't matter what you say, he doesn't see it. So what he, and that is a quote, he doesn't see how bad the aftermath of all of this could be, not only for him personally, of course, but for the country. But that is not his concern right now. His concern is that he needs to find a way to back out, because he's going to lose, without looking like a loser, which he thinks is the worst thing in the world. And so he's, I guess, trying to work this through or not, because in the end, I don't expect him to concede. I don't expect him to be gracious. I think in one way or another, he'll walk out the back door and drop the mic somewhere, but to an adoring crowd, perhaps. But he just doesn't see what this is doing to the country because he can't see beyond himself.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your time. Dan?
Ridiculous.
You move freely.
There was a plan from a centralized place to execute these various acts of voter fraud, specifically focused on big cities.
Even with disinformation emanating from the very top, the process marches on. Michigan has now certified its statewide results. A recount in Georgia is coming to an end, with Biden still winning. And as more battleground states certify tallies ahead of a December 8th deadline, President Trump's pathways to challenging votes are being closed off, one by one. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Sy.
For more on the Trump campaign's election maneuverings, we turn to our White House correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor. She's in Wilmington, Delaware tonight. Yamiche, so nice to see you. Help us explain, what is the political strategy behind the Trump campaign's efforts to keep fighting these fights in these different states?
Well, President Trump is continuing to ratchet up his campaign to unjustifiably have the election overturned in his favor by getting personally involved in a way we have not seen any American president do in an election. And the Trump campaign is continuing to file lawsuit after lawsuit without any evidence of their claims of voter fraud. And most of that is coming through the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Now, the president did something that was very, very remarkable. He called 2 county officials in Michigan, in Wayne County, which includes Detroit, and he essentially talked to them about the election. Now, these officials were people who did not at first want to certify the votes. They then went ahead and voted to certify them. But after talking to President Trump, they then decided they wanted to rescind their votes to certify. Now, state officials say that there is no legal avenue to do that. But critics of the president say that this is dangerous behavior for him to actually be calling people personally as the president of the United States. Also, the president has invited the top 2 Republican elected officials in Michigan. They have a Republican-controlled state legislature to the White House. Critics of the president say that's going to be, again, a bid for him to try to overturn a state where President Joe Biden is leading him by 150,000 votes. Now, I put the question to President-elect Biden today, is all of this behavior from the president, is it making you change your legal strategy? Is it making you alarmed? He said that he is not changing his legal strategy at this time, but that the president is being irresponsible and possibly being the most irresponsible president in U.S. history.
Yamiche, as you mentioned, they've had some legal setbacks, the Trump campaign, but is this perhaps working in the court of public opinion? I mean, are these various fights actually changing people's minds?
Well, despite President Trump not having any evidence of his claims of voter fraud, it is absolutely having an impact on the American electorate, in particular Trump supporters. Now, yesterday, Monmouth University released a poll, and it showed that 77% of Trump supporters believe that Joe Biden is the president-elect due to fraud, and only 11% believe that the election was actually fair and square. Now, that's problematic because President-elect Joe Biden will have to govern in America where millions and millions of Americans believe the president's unfounded claims. And the President Trump, he could take that same influence and have these voters continuing to believe that the election was rigged and somehow stolen from him, and he could continue to fundraise, continue to have influence in the Republican Party. So it's definitely a place where we should watch that space.
God, those poll numbers are really incredible. Yamiche Alcindor from Wilmington, Delaware, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks.
For more on the president's moves, we turn again to Nate Persily. He is at Stanford University Law School, and he is the co-founder of the Healthy Elections Project. Nate, great to see you again. There are so many pots cooking on the stove here, legal pots all over the country. I wonder if you could help us figure some of these things out. Let's talk about the lawsuits first. By my count, the Trump campaign has filed maybe 24 different kinds of lawsuits. Will you remind us, what are those suits, what have they been suing, and how have they been received?
Well, there's been 31 decisions at this point, actually, or withdrawals of lawsuits, and they've lost 30 of them. And these lawsuits span the gamut from questioning signature verification in Nevada to accusing different election officials in Pennsylvania of applying different standards to Democrats and Republicans, as well as a host of other procedural objections about, for example, not enough observers getting close enough to observe the ballot counting process. And so far, the courts have been quite resilient, and they've been turning away these lawsuits, and the Trump campaign has been losing them. But there are still several that are in the pipeline, 5 or 6 that are sort of the more major cases, many in Pennsylvania. And in addition to those cases, we have recount processes in Georgia and in Wisconsin that themselves might lead to lawsuits.
The thing I find so interesting is that we heard again in Stephanie Tsai's report that Rudy Giuliani is still alleging this broader conspiracy, that there was this sort of cadre of people in a central place plotting this voter fraud. And yet, as you're describing, when you look at the actual cases, the cases don't seem to be alleging any part of that grand conspiracy.
Well, that's right, because it can't be proven. So you can't just say sort of the man behind the curtain is responsible for all of these voting problems and not know who that man might be. And so there's been a kind of blunderbuss approach to these accusations. They include, accusations about the voting machine manufacturers, accusations about local election officials or even people in polling places. And then you have accusations against the state officials, some of whom are Republican and some of whom are Democrat. So it's not as if it's just going after some kind of conspiracy on the part of the Biden campaign. It's going after the entire election infrastructure in some respects, saying that there was a multi-state effort in order to sort of shift votes to Biden.
You mentioned before that there were recounts that are going on. Can you remind us where those are happening and whose votes are being counted?
So right now we have a full-on recount that's happening in Georgia, and that should conclude in the next few days. And those are all the ballots that were cast in Georgia. It's actually technically what we call an election audit, but they're going to be recounting all the ballots. And just to prepare your viewers, there will be a difference in the numbers that are recounted than the ones that were the final totals. There always are in these kinds of recounts, but they won't be in the thousands that would be needed to flip the result. In Wisconsin, we have a different procedure that's about to unfold, where the Trump campaign has paid $3 million to have recounts in Dane and Milwaukee counties. Dane is where the capital Madison is. And so they will do some recounts there to see whether there's any sort of significant errors between the votes that were cast on Election Day and in the mail.
Training. Only it.
Certificates of ascertainment are then issued as a ministerial duty, just like what was explained in Wayne County, and then those electors will be seated.
And Mr. Kinlock, I'm going to give you the final word on this. Do you view this as an attack on black voters, to be blunt, in the city of Detroit?
Oh, without a doubt. We had a board of canvass meeting on Tuesday, and the chair of the county, chair of our board of canvassers, was willing to entertain or ask whether or not we were willing to consider a certification that did not include the city of Detroit. I mean, this is basically what all these lawsuits have been about. It's been about bringing disparage about among the votes in the city of Detroit. You had the chair as well as the other Republican member on the Board of Canvassers participating in challenging ballots at the absentee county board in the city of Detroit. They weren't out in Livonia. They weren't in Grosse Pointe. They were right there in the city of Detroit challenging ballots, and then brought that insanity into our certification process. This is all about disenfranchising the black votes in the city of Detroit, and that is unacceptable, and we here in Michigan will not stand for that.
Yeah, if you just take the votes in Milwaukee and Detroit out, Trump wins one vote. So just take all the black people out. That's the easiest way for Trump to win. It's madness. Jonathan Kinlock and Jacobs, thank you both for being there and standing up for democracy. Thank you both. And up next, a member of President-elect Biden's COVID task force joins me on the escalating virus catastrophe and the toll that it's taking on America's healthcare professionals like this one.
The emotional and the physical stress, it's exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. I don't know how.
A son with bruises, a mother with a black eye.
A brutal murder. You going to charge?
Doing the work of making sure jobs come back.
but I was part of a larger network of folks. What I was able to do over the last decade was build infrastructure, raise resources, and scale the investment, and I've been a relentless cheerleader about the possibilities of Georgia. So I am happy to take credit for pulling attention to Georgia, but I want to make certain that we understand this was work done by many organizations and many people who would never get the credit because they could never get the resources to be seen and be heard. And I also want to point out that the work that we did in Georgia also happened around the country, that if you were in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, where voter suppression harmed your ability to vote in 2016 or 2018, there were voter protection folks on the ground in those states across the country, but particularly in those states who reversed the attempts to suppress the right to vote and made certain that voters could be heard. Here in Georgia, it's been about any voter suppression, but also engaging new voters, and I am proud to be a part of making that a reality in Georgia in 2020.
Yeah, and I know you talk about your team, but obviously you have been, very clearly credited by so many. When you lost the governor's race, and that was in 2018, you didn't concede formally, and now you've got Republicans, right? Lindsey Graham, bringing him up again, he's pointing to that and saying that there's a double standard being applied today, given that and President Trump's failure to concede. What is it you think that is so important for people to understand about what you did and why it is different from what President Trump is doing now?
In 2018, tens of thousands of Georgia voters were denied the right to cast ballots, to have those ballots counted. They were pushed out of the electorate through no fault of their own and in defiance of their citizenship in the United States and in the state of Georgia. What I said on the night that I ended my campaign was, number one, I ended the campaign. I said that I acknowledged the legal sufficiency of the election, but I challenged the system that permitted voters to lose their right to vote. That is something we should all decry and something we should all fight against. In contrast, Donald Trump is decrying the system that didn't allow him to cheat, a system that permitted every voter who tried to be heard, by and large, to be allowed and included in the process. He is refusing to acknowledge that the system did what it was supposed to do. Now, if he dislikes the system, I'd say use the court system if you want to challenge it, but you have to tell the truth and you have to provide evidence. We provided not only sufficient evidence to get to a federal court and to see market changes made in the state of Georgia, but we had sufficient evidence to make an entire documentary about it. And so I would argue that the absence of evidence is proof that there is no analogous situation between what I did in 2018 and what Donald Trump is doing today.
All right, well, Stacey Abrams, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and next, Trump now using the power of his office to try to flip Michigan votes. Out front now, the governor of Michigan, Democrat Gretchen Whitmer. And Governor, I appreciate your time. So the president, says that that he should win the state, even though he lost it by 157,000 votes. What can you do about it?
Well, Aaron, I mean, the president can say all he wants. He can summon people to the White House all he wants. He can try to interfere, which raises serious legal and ethical questions, by the way. But the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden won this state and won big by 14 times the margin that Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016. The will of the people will be done. And these efforts to disenfranchise Wayne County, a majority, where the majority of our African-American voters live, is just a blatant attempt to steal the election result and disenfranchise Michigan voters, and it will not stand.
So we are learning, Governor, that Trump extended this invitation, right, as you say, to summon to the White House by calling the Republican majority leader of the Michigan State Senate, Mike Shirkey. And Shirkey was asked earlier this week about, this whole idea that Republicans could, overturn the election and choose to appoint electors for Trump instead of Biden. And he said at the time, quote, "That's not going to happen. We're going to follow the law and follow the process." Clearly standing up for, he's going to follow the will of the people. Do you have any concerns that Trump could change his mind?
Oh, of course I do. I don't know why they'd be going to the White House. Maybe they're going to lobby for COVID funding, which would be welcome here in Michigan and across the country. It's one of the things that our nation's governors, I was one of them, met with the incoming Biden administration about today. That is desperately needed. And if that's what they're doing, wonderful. But if they are going there to undermine the result of this election and to disenfranchise Michigan voters and to embarrass the state of Michigan, what they are doing runs against our law, and they should be very careful because it's dangerous.
So, you've got that invitation, right, happening. And then there's also the other story, of course, we've covered this week, and you brought it up about Wayne County and Detroit. So, whether they were certifying the results. So the split Democrat-Republican team or canvassers, at first the Republicans didn't certify the results, then they did. And then Trump called them, right? He called them on Tuesday night. And those same two officials, after that phone call, then said they wanted to rescind their votes and that they wanted to, again, not certify the results of the voters of Wayne County, Michigan. Clearly the president got them to change their mind. Governor, do you think he violated any laws?
I think that there's a legitimate question there. I do, and I think that continuous efforts to interfere are, could be legally unsound, and I think they should all be very careful. They have a job to do, and the job is to certify this election. The state board needs to do that. And if they don't, there will be ramifications from it. And I really believe and hope that they follow the law, they do their jobs, they respect the will of the people of this state and don't embarrass the state of Michigan any more than it already has been. And that we certify this election and be done with it, because the people of this state spoke, and they spoke loudly on Election Day.
So I know that you had a meeting with the President-elect's team today. You said your state is experiencing the worst week that you have had during the whole pandemic this week. You've got cases surging, hospitalizations surging, and the meeting you had with the President-elect today was bipartisan, is my understanding, right? There were some Republican governors, some Democratic governors. The Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was there as well. So Biden has made it clear that he supports mask mandates. You, though, have seen firsthand opposition to that. Do you think there's any chance this country will go forward with moves like that, mask mandates?
I hope so. I know that a lot of my Republican counterparts have embraced mask mandates, seeing how COVID's ravaging their state, and knowing that this is the singular best weapon we have right now to keep us safe and to keep our economy engaged. It is really on the nation's governors to show this leadership, especially right now. But I am grateful and looking forward to a Biden administration, because I know that they're going to spend their energy getting our arms around COVID-19 and supporting states. We've got a Herculean undertaking in terms of administering vaccines when they become available. And we need the full backing and support of the federal government, who takes this virus as seriously as we do.
All right, Governor Whitmer, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. And now we have breaking news. We have just learned that Georgia has finished its statewide hand recount, checking every vote by hand, and the results are in. And they confirmed that Joe Biden won the state of Georgia. His lead over President Trump confirmed. Amara Walker is out front. So Amara, they came out, they said it confirms Biden won Georgia, and they go into all of the details on the count and what changed and what didn't. You've read through it. What do you say?
So first off, this is exactly what state election officials had been expecting. In fact, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, has been saying for days now, look, I expect that this hand recount is only going to affirm the overall results, the original results of the election. But as you mentioned,
and unfortunately, we're going to have to avoid indoor crowded spaces like bars and restaurants. And you're going to have to be very careful even with family gatherings. And that's what Dr. Redfield was talking about today.
What do you say to people who feel like, they've listened to the CDC guidance this whole time? We've seen much more mask wearing than we have ever seen through this whole process. And they feel like they've followed the guidelines, but it's just getting worse. What do you tell them?
So, the guidelines really work. The United Kingdom and France has turned it around with these simple measures and keeping schools and businesses open, not a lockdown. We've done it in Arizona, Florida, Texas, across the Deep South. Really, this is what we need to do. This will turn it around. We only have a few more weeks to do this. If we do this, we'll flatten it. The vaccine will be here. We'll protect the vulnerable.
People have been patient for so long, So you tell them to stay home for Thanksgiving, these 50 million who are likely to travel.
So I don't think the CDC said that. They recommended that the safest thing to do is to stay home, because there are risks in traveling in buses, trains, in airports. Sure. But if you are going to travel, there are some really good suggestions on how to be safer within your home, distancing, masking, hygiene, etc. Please look at the website. Very reasonable, things. Make better choices.
Admiral Jawar, thank you. Good to see you again, sir. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
So for months, parents across the country have pleaded for an end to
by openly subverting the will of 80 million voters. Well, right now, they're gorging themselves on power, stuffing the Federal Elections Commission, Federal Reserve Board, and the courts with their appointees before President-elect Biden shows up and turns off the spigot. Just yesterday, the Senate confirmed 33-year-old Catherine Mizell to a lifetime federal judgeship. The former Clarence Thomas clerk was so top-notch, she was rated not qualified by the American Bar Association because of her lack of trial experience. Meanwhile, millions of Americans are in desperate need of help because of the coronavirus, and clearly the GOP thinks they can wait. Let them eat judges. Joining me now is former Senator Al Franken, host of the Al Franken podcast. And Senator, it's always great to talk with you. So this is what we're doing. Republicans don't care about democracy. They hate elections because they don't always win. And they are watching Donald Trump burn down the House so they can get more judges and stack the Federal Reserve Board with their people and 33-year-old unqualified judges. Is that the same Republican senator cohort that you knew?
Yes. They're a disgrace. The longer that they refuse to acknowledge that Joe Biden won, fairly, the more Republican base is going to buy into the fiction that this was rigged, and that undermines democracy, and that causes lasting damage. You can't get that's going to be with us for a long, long time. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, and it's an absolute disgrace. And this is the time when we have the worst we have an emergency, we have a pandemic, this thing is spiking and people are dying, and we have a president who just refuses to do this job that that he's fighting to get, but he has no interest in doing. And we need a government now addressing this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is much more interested in keeping himself out of legal liability by remaining president than in doing the job of president. I think that's pretty clear, and there's some reporting to back that up. Let's go through some of these senators individually. Let's talk about Lindsey Graham. There's now been a Senate ethics complaint against him for what he's been doing, meddling in the Georgia election. He also did some fundraising from the Senate, which he's not supposed to do, trying to tell Georgia to just, a Republican official in Georgia, the Republican Secretary of State, just throw out the ballots, throw out the legal mail-in ballots so Trump can win. What is
Republican Secretary of State.
Is he that little? Yeah.
And
what is Lindsey Graham? I don't understand.
Well, he's a very cynical politician. That's what he is first and foremost, and he will tell you that if you're serving with him in the Senate. We know that. Look, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia said that Lindsey called him and asked him basically to get rid of some legal votes. And then Lindsey denied that. And then, unfortunately, there was another person on the phone. There was a witness to that. Lindsey also said in the interview where he denied it that I talked to a lot of secretaries of state that night, including the Secretary of State of Arizona. And the Secretary of State of Arizona said, no, he didn't talk to me. If this were like a murder, he'd be in a lot of trouble. And yes, there's an ethics investigation, and there should be. And if he's lying, which, he should get due process. But this is really serious. This is.
And there's also ethics investigation. There are also some accusations of ethics violations by the two sitting senators, Kelly Loeffler for violating ethics rules with making fundraising pitches to try to get her a seat. She's not won the first time. She wants to get elected for the first time.
She did that in the Russell Rotunda.
Yeah, exactly. She also, of course, sold stock at a beneficial time for her after she got the briefings about COVID. David Perdue helped a defense contractor and sold off stock at a beneficial time for him when they both found out how bad COVID was. This is who these Republicans are fighting dog in, dog out to get into the Senate. At this point, do we actually have two political parties, or do you agree with David Frum that we have one political party and sort of a mafia on the other side that just wants to try to get minority rule for completely unethical people?
I split the difference. We have two political parties, and one of them's kind of a mock. And I mean, this is, look, you know, this crazy that senators have stocks in, any stocks, you know, they should have mutual funds or, you know, exchange traded funds. That's what I had. I mean, that's what you should have. And yeah, what Purdue did was vote on something and then immediately sell a stock in a defense contractor that he helped. And what Loeffler did was awful. It was, she sold, she had privy information to prices and sold, you know, the COVID crisis and sold stocks. Sold hotel stocks.
Let me talk about a guy that you might remember from New York, and that would be Rudy Giuliani. You know, I was never a fan. He wasn't particularly nice to black people when he was mayor of New York, so I was never a big fan of his. But there were a lot of people who were and thought that he did, you know, a great job, just actually speaking after 9/11 like a normal mayor. But he has now become a really weird, tragic figure. What do you think is going on there? There he is with his hair dye running down his cheeks. But what do you think is going on with this guy?
Well, you know, I should point out that Atticus Finch had his hair dye rolled down in the Kill a Mockingbird. So it's not necessarily a sign that you're a sleeve bag. I don't know. This guy has some problems and has had for quite a while. And can you imagine that's your guy? That's your go-to election lawyer. Okay, James Baker, Rudy Giuliani. It's pretty amazing. And the stuff he was saying today was so crazy. And look, this is so damaging because Republican base is going to buy into this more and more the longer this goes on. And that's a tragedy. It's especially a tragedy now. Look, I was watching CNN, I'm sorry, the other day, and a nurse in an interview said that she has patients, this is a South Dakota nurse, has patients who are dying of COVID.
They don't believe it.
Who don't believe it, who are denying they're dying of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is because Donald Trump refused to be illegal.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And we forgive you for watching CNN on occasion. You can do it once in a while, but you have to keep coming back to us. Former Senator Al Franken, we love having you. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. And MSNBC's exclusive interview with...
From side to side.
That we continue to allow the larger companies to become larger and larger because you keep making the same mistake over and over again.
So, you know, you have the president, right, and I kind of had gone through it at the beginning of the show, right, but, you know, you have 12 days where there's nothing on his public schedule, right, yet he's tweeted nearly 500 times, right, and most of them are things that are false about the election, all caps, I won. So you know him. You were part of the transition that he had last time around on the National Economic Council. You're familiar with the erratic behavior, with the mercurial nature that he presents. But my question to you now is, Gary, is there anyone still around him, because you know them all, that can actually get through to him, that can break through to him and let him hear what he should do and what the country needs him to do now?
Look, Eric, I don't know the answer. My best guess would be it would have to be his family and his family members. They're the people that are closest to him. They're the people he relies upon. Those are the people he trusts, and those are the people he's been with. Remember, the president came from a family business. He's used to being surrounded by family. He's used to listening to his family. I don't think he's going to listen to an outside influencer.
So then, you know, what happens next? Because as you point out, this lame duck session is really important. Mitt Romney's made this point, right? He's worried about troops being drawn down and all sorts of things happening all of a sudden for reasons of vengeance or whatever it might be. But what really is at stake here in this lame duck? I mean, you're pointing out unemployment benefits are going to end. I mean, real things are happening to real people right now because of these decisions or lack thereof.
They are, and look, the Biden administration also deserves a normal transition. They deserve to be getting the information they should get that a normal transition would have. They deserve to be getting the funding from the GAO that they should be getting. They deserve to have the support so they can hit the ground running on January 20th. One of the things we pride ourselves in this country is a normal, peaceful transfer of power. We need to have that, and that starts literally from Election Day on. It's hard to transfer power in this country. There are a lot of jobs and a lot of offices that need to be filled, and President-elect Biden needs to have that information at his disposal, and he deserves that information to make sure he's making the best decisions to put himself in the best position on January 20th to make good decisions.
All right, I appreciate your time. Gary, thank you very much.